and the chat options are both in that same area. And now I'll mute myself and shut up.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, a very, very brief situation report. We can talk for hours about this. But currently, as I'm sure everyone's noticed, we've got 44 houses being built at Church Farm and a further 8 on Lower Street. Interestingly, both of those were approved well, Church Farm was 10 years ago, and I think Lower Street was about 15 years ago. So we actually haven't had any major housing development approved in this village in the last 8 or 9 years. The situation Mendip is in is that the UK government recalibrated how they determined housing need, and the outcome of that was to say that Mendip had to build a lot more houses, best over 500 more houses every year. They couldn't just turn that supply on overnight, and that meant that Mendip did not have a 5-year housing land supply. The significance of that means that it's not the Mendip local plan that is the sole determinant of whether houses get approved or not. The major consideration is the National Planning Policy Framework, shortened generally to MPPF, and that's generally said to favour development. Mendip is currently using the term it's the tip balance, so the balance is in favour of development. Doesn't mean that they can't refuse applications. They have refused applications. The developer then, of course, can take Mendip to appeal, where they can get overturned at appeal, and even though the planning board has turned it down, it doesn't stay turned down, it gets approved. That actually happened, I believe, with the houses on Lower Street. So Mendip is under a lot of pressure to approve housing developments. It's under MPPF pressure, but it's also under pressure to deliver a lot more houses. Currently, as we all know, we've got the application for the Mead, 29 houses, and tonight we're talking about the 49 houses being applied for to go on Barboursfield. Road Parish Council can't determine the outcome of those planning applications. All it can do is express its view, its recommendation. As I've said many times, both with the Mead development and now with Barboursfield, there is every possibility that both developments could be approved. It's unlikely but possible that neither will be approved. It's very possible that just one will be approved. And those are the considerations that the Parish Council will need to give thought to. So I'm now going to invite people to speak. So please find that little wave button. I can see Anne Edney is waving physically at me. Anne, would you like to say something at this point? Yes. Please go ahead.
We seem to have forgotten the houses that are being built opposite the Bell, because I thought there was only 3, but apparently there's 5 going up.
Yes, you're quite right. That's a relatively recent application, I should think, Anne, in the last 3 years. But yes, you're quite right to correct me. There are 3, no, I think 5 houses going up opposite the Bell. Yeah. Thank you. So if you'd like to, if the person who's got their hand up, their digital hand, it's Alec and Becky Small, who did actually raise the issue of could they both speak. and I said, yes, they could both speak, and if they wish to, they can speak consecutively, or one of them can hold their fire. So, Alex, if you unmute yourself and one of you go ahead.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. I'm going to speak first, actually, and Alex, my husband's going to follow. So I'm Becky Small. I'm a resident here in Rhode. I'm a partner at Wilson Solicitors. I specialise in catastrophic claims resulting in brain injuries. I manage both birth injury cases and, most importantly for the purpose of this evening, road traffic injury cases. 80% of my road traffic accident cases do not, as you would expect, occur on motorways or busy main roads. They're actually in rural locations. Why, I guess you're all asking? One, narrow lanes, speed of the defendant, and defendants mounting pavements. It's for this very reason that we opposed the Murfield development last year, and for this very reason, amongst many other reasons, we oppose the Barbarafield development. In my opinion, there should be no further large-scale development in Road. I read and prepare witness statements on a daily basis that would scar your memories, scar your minds from the devastating consequences of road traffic accidents. And whilst researching the information for information surrounding incidents in this local area, I was actually pleased, Peter, to read in Somerset Live a quote from yourself dated 30th of June 2018, which, forgive me if I'm wrong, was prior to the Church Farm development. I'm just going to read it, if I may, verbatim. There has been so much housing, so Peter, your words, there has been so much housing development in this part of Somerset, but we've seen no improvement to the road infrastructure. Traffic on the A36 and A361 constantly backs up through our village and through neighbouring villages. This has resulted both in serious accidents and in drivers avoiding the jams and speeding along rat runs through road on streets not designed for these volumes of traffic. So our chair of the councillors appears to support my view, which is that the infrastructure does not support any further housing development. And whilst it may be possible to widen roads in some areas, we can all appreciate that we can't start physically push back houses, certainly when you get further into the village, which obviously it has the impact on. And again, I speak for Murfield and for Barbarafield. Furthermore, as raised by Councillor Oliver at a meeting recently, the week before last, and supported by one of my co-partners at Wilson's, outline planning should not be used for proposals of this nature. Mr. Still Perkins himself has acknowledged that only 50% of developments nationally are applied for in this way. There is a reason the remaining 50% is not. Only non-contentious applications where the principle for development is already widely accepted should use this process. Why, we as residents cannot rely on the following: design of houses and how many stories there's going to be, size of houses, value, suitability for elderly residents, number of cars, green credentials, and just general layout. It's a blank canvas, and once the land is sold, it's all up for grabs. It could potentially bypass the Parish Council's involvement or scrutiny by Mendip's elected councillors. So we would then be reliant on Mendip's planning officers who may simply not have the time. So we're at risk here. Parish councillors, please listen to the people, your residents, and do the right thing. Please oppose this development. I've only touched the surface of the flaws that I see with this development, and the noise and light pollution in my backyard could be argued as emotional and irrelevant, as I accept, as everyone else, that houses have to go up somewhere. So let's push those emotional arguments aside. The safety of our community, in my view, is very relevant and a high priority that requires very careful consideration. I'm going to hand over to Alex now because he'd like to say a few words.
Thanks, Bex. Peter, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak, and good evening to everyone. I'm Alex Small, for those of you who don't know me. Becky and I and our family have lived in the village of Road for the last 8 years. Enjoy it very much and love the community we have here. I think there are many objectionable aspects to this whole proposed development of Barbarafield, but in the short time I've got this evening, I'm just going to focus on one of them, which is the notion of developing in the open countryside. Anyone who's looked into this proposal will have already seen that this is a proposed development in the open countryside and also of a Greenfield site. Now, in of itself, that goes in contravention of Mendip's own planning guidelines, but not least also our own neighbourhood plan in Road. And my huge concern here is that were this to be approved, this would be just the thin end of a very thick wedge, where it would set a precedent, I believe, for developers to see this as an opportunity to even potentially the existing landowners here in the village, but also outside in other village areas too, to use this as leverage to then start to develop other areas in our village and surrounding areas, fundamentally changing the look and feel of the village in an irreparable manner. We have to understand that developments of this type and of this scale and this size are, irreparable, irrevocable. Once they've gone up, they've gone up. And as Bex mentioned earlier, with a blank canvas of a simply, outline planning, we really have no idea as to what this final, look and feel would be. So that concerns me greatly. I think also what I would say is that this would represent the largest development the Road has ever seen, if I'm right in my research. 49 houses would be absolutely larger than, for example, the brewery and Church Farm. I think it's completely disproportionate, and the Parish Council have quite rightly unanimously voted down the development of the Mead, 29 houses. So proportionately, for them to approve a development of 49 houses would be illogical and quite frankly insane in my view. And the reason for that is that, let's be fair, the village itself will feel the impact of either of these two developments were they to go ahead. So this isn't the lesser of two evils. This is simply that we should oppose, as a village and as a parish council, we should oppose both vigorously. I think, it's also clear in final wrapping up that Road residents are making it very clear how they feel. We've sent out flyers. I myself have received a number of responses back. Over 90% of the responses I've had have been absolutely vehemently opposed to the development. And currently, as I looked an hour ago on the Mendip District Council portal for planning, there were 39 oppositions to the development and currently 0 in favour. So I think 100% opposition rate as we currently speak. So I'll wrap up there, but I hope that's given some thought for the Parish Council to consider as you deliberate the proposed development. So thank you, Peter, and I'll pass on to the next person.
Thank you. If you could take your hand down, that would be helpful.
Yeah, of course.
And Paul, could you just introduce yourself, Paul?
Thank you, Peter. Good evening, everybody. My name's Paul Westbury, and my family and I have been in the village for about 15 years now. By way of quick introduction, I spent the last 30 years in development and construction. So you all boo and hiss at me when I tell you that. But I've been on the other side of the table. So you would say that I am poacher turned gamekeeper. So I've been involved in producing planning applications quite a lot larger than this. So I know what to look for, if I'm brutally honest. And the first thing I read was the transport statement to understand the traffic impact on our village. I was sufficiently concerned to immediately bring in an independent consultant, planning and traffic consultant, who's written me a letter which, Peter, I think you know, because I copied that to the Parish Council as part of my feedback. And the letter speaks for itself, but for those people who, of course, haven't seen it, I would summarise a few key points from it. The transport statement in the planning application is weak, and it is not at all comprehensive. The existing junction of Church Lane with the A361 is technically substandard. The assessment in the planning application of the sight lines from Church Lane onto the A361 is flawed, confirming, of course, what we all know as villagers who avoid that junction like the plague. The narrow width of Church Lane at the junction with the A361 could easily lead to unacceptable and dangerous interruptions in traffic flow on the A361, leading to, and I quote from the note from the consultant, decreased safety and increased movement challenges. That Church Lane junction, if it gets bunged up with cars, simply prevents people from turning in or out, and it causes a significant problem. Church Lane itself, as we know, is a historic route and is not suitable for access to a development of this nature. It's narrow and it has substandard footpaths. Despite all of that, The transport statement in this application assumes that 90% of the traffic will move through that Church Lane junction. And given what I've just been through from our independent consultant and what we know as locals, it's more likely that that traffic will move through the village, and I quote from the consultant, causing traffic congestion within the village itself. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm in that part of the village, I don't use that junction. I drive through the village, and I was interested when Dave Jupp said last week that Titch Fussell drives down through the village, and I don't blame him, because that junction is dangerous. The planning application has no assessment of any traffic impact on the village itself, either for the lowly 10% that is assumed to drive through it in the application, or what looks far more likely to be a significant number of vehicles from the 166 parking spaces allocated within that site. There is no reference in the transport assessment to the use of Church Lane by construction traffic, despite that being acknowledged in the planning statement as a key concern. I'm tremendously worried about trucks moving down that Church Lane in either direction. With those footpaths, I think it will be seriously unsafe. None of these things are addressed properly or issued properly in the planning application on their own are strong grounds for objection. Just 30 seconds on reinforcing my objection to development in a Greenfield site. This Greenfield site sits outside the local plan development limits, and it sits between two conservation areas. Conservation areas, I'm sure you're aware, are granted that status, not just because of what is within them, but also because of the natural environment within which they sit. This development would be a harmful impact on that. 2 days ago, the Dasgupta review was published by UK Treasury, valuing natural countryside as an essential UK economic asset, targeting its protection to avoid what I quote would be devastating cost. There are excellent examples of brownfield and infill development that everybody has seen, but this application shuns both of those smarter approaches and once again lazily targets high value open countryside and must be prevented. I could go on and on with my experience of development. I suspect, Peter, in respect of your 3-minute rule, I will hang up my notes, but we're pretty passionate about this down at our end of the village. But thank you for your time.
Paul, thank you. So, just looking, I've got somebody else. Do I have somebody else who wants to say anything at this stage? Yeah, I have two. Andrew Court. If you could unmute yourself.
Is that better?
Yep, I can hear you loud and clear.
My name's Andrew. I've been a resident here in Road for about 18 years. First of all on the High Street, and now I'm resident of Clay Lane. I'm very much opposed to this development. I'd like to first start off by thanking the Road Parish Council for organising this meeting. I do, however, feel that these Zoom meetings are really not ideal for discussing such an important issue. Not everyone in the village will be comfortable with using Zoom. I don't feel that the meeting was particularly well advertised. I couldn't find anything about it in the link. And as I said, I don't think people are necessarily au fait with using Zoom for this type of meeting. It's my opinion that on such an important issue, the meeting should be postponed until we can have a full public meeting to discuss it fully, where everyone in the village can participate. That's my first point. But I do thank you for doing your best to arrange it in such a difficult time. I'd like to just emphasize Becky's point first about building on Greenfield sites. Once the PC agree to building on one of the Greenfield sites, this is effectively gives a green light to many more. The PC will have, the Parish Council will have no defence against future proposals on Greenfield sites, as a precedent will have already been set. And I feel that we as a village should say a blanket no to any building on Greenfield sites in and around our village. I'd like to discuss Brown's Ground next. My feeling is that Andy Fussell knows very well that his proposal will be unpopular. What Andy Fussell is effectively saying is that if the village lets me build 49 houses, I'll give Brown's Ground to the village as an amenity. Now, I'm not at all comfortable with this type of bargaining arrangement when it comes to a particularly large housing development. Whilst it sounds like a lovely idea to have a nice park in the village, I think the parish council needs to focus on the impact of the housing estate, which would affect us all. In my view, building on a Greenfield site, 49 houses close to the centre of the village, in my view, is no, well, Brown's Ground is no substitute for having to put up with such a huge housing development. It's an agricultural field, and in my view, it should remain so. I'd like to build on what Alex said about traffic. I invite everybody, including parish council members, to consider what routes you would take in a car to and from the proposed development. The traffic statement in the proposal makes no mention of the traffic impact on Clay Lane, for instance. Clay Lane is the obvious route from the development to Bradford Road. Clay Lane, as you know, is a one-way, not a one-way, but single track road used by walkers and children walking to school. It would be very dangerous to have more traffic along Clay Lane. I cannot imagine that cars would try and get up Church Lane onto the A361 in busy times, then turn left into the Bradford Road. They would use Clay Lane as a cut through. And I don't care what you do to it to try and block it off or to make it access only for residents, it would get used. It would be impossible to enforce any restrictions on Clay Lane. It would be used as a cut through to the Bradford Road. Similarly, the traffic statement makes no mention, as Paul said, about a route through the village. If you look at the route from Bradford on Avon back into the village, that would be down the Bradford Road, turn right into Road Hill, cut through down to Marsh Road, along Nuts Lane, and left into Church Lane. Now, these are very narrow residential streets, single track roads really, where passing another car is very difficult. There are children playing in the street often, and totally unsuitable for traffic to come back to the development.
Andrew, I'm going to have to ask you to finish now. I've given you 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Neve Riley has sent me a message. Hello, Neve. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, Peter. Sorry, it's under my daughter's name. So, just to introduce myself, my name is Alison Graham, and not Neve Riley for this evening. And I actually live on the back of Greenfield and in the eponymous Barbara's house, in fact. And I just wanted to point out I'm extremely unhappy about the traffic situation, having been nearly run down in Clay Lane several times over the last 10 years that I've lived here. But we also seem to have gone off the boil on the idea of flooding. Over the last couple of weeks, we have just been completely flooded, the back of our garden and in and down to Clay Lane. There is, at the moment, merely a ditch, which has been there for, I don't know, since they decided to do it, I think about 10 years ago, which has never been satisfactory, and we've had to put our own water removal system in. But the whole of Clay Lane is flooded. The idea that you can dig trenches or ponds, seepage ponds, that will take off the water off that housing, 49 houses with roofs, all the concrete that's going to go down. Where is all that water going to go? And the idea that it's just going to seep away seems to, I just wonder, when I spoke to Andy Fussell about it on a more personal level, that we thought our own garden might be flooded and into our back part of the house, he just said, we'll sort it out when we get the planning permission. And I really feel that flooding off that field, as has been seen as flooding off Brown's ground over the last couple of months, really is something that we need to be looking at as well. Okay, that's just
Thank you. Thank you very much. Just to come back on one point about Andrew's comment about he doesn't like Zoom meetings. I couldn't agree with you more. I don't think any of us like Zoom meetings. If we could all be in the Memorial Hall discussing it, it would be a much more productive way. Unfortunately, the link copy deadline was too far ahead of us to be able to put it into the link. It has been on Road Village Facebook as the lead item for most of this week. And the pressure we're under to respond back to Mendip did mean that we needed to have this meeting today, and for the parish council to make its determination next week. There is a parish council meeting, a special parish council meeting, where the parish council will decide what stance it wants to take. Parish councillors aren't really at liberty to get involved in discussions. They can raise issues at this particular meeting, but the monitoring officer has said we shouldn't be expressing our opinions until the parish council's meeting on Tuesday. So we have done our utmost to encourage as many people as possible to join this meeting, and at the moment we've got 37. I see I've got Linda Oliver and I think Gary. I'll let Gary as a resident go first, and then I'll come to Linda after that. Gary, if you like to unmute yourself.
Okay?
Yeah, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, right. I'll try and keep this short. First of all, I'd like to applaud. If I get all the names right, good. If not, apologies. Alex, Becky, Paul, Andrew, and was it Neve? Last lady? Alison Graham. Sorry, Alison. I thought all of whom were very succinct and very clear and very persuasive in what they said. So thank you for all that. I would just like to summarise and say the traffic and infrastructure problems are something that I know quite a lot about, living at my end of the village, as I do. And, you know, I've been around in this village probably far too long, but I've been here a very long time. And there comes a point where you have to say, it's going to burst. And I think we've reached that point, frankly. I've made my views very clear in my note to Hugh about Mr. Steele, whose attitude seems to be that, well, it's a fait accompli because someone's going to build, so you might as well let it be this one. Oh, and by the way, the detail isn't really up to us. It's someone else's problem, which is pretty much what he said when I asked about traffic, because I knew what he was going to say, so I answered it for him. They don't know the answers, and they don't have to give those answers because they're hoping that they can do it this way and therefore avoid it and let it be someone else's problem. And then if those developers decide to do whatever they want to do, they say, well, it wasn't us. I just find that, well, you can read into that what you like. Also, the word incentive was used. I think that's a very polite way of putting it, and I find that totally unacceptable. Yeah. The incentive that's been offered, that's just, I think, and I've made this clear to various people at various times, just wrong. There's other words that could be used, wrong. If they feel that strongly about it, then they could donate it anyway. As I understand it from Barbie, if I may call her that, Andy will not sign that land over unless he gets planning permission. Because one of the things that did cross my mind was, and I know in a town I used to live in Yorkshire, where a community effort bought a large lump of land to protect it. but if Andy won't sell it, then it's irrelevant anyway. But I just throw that into the hat and say thank you as well, Peter, for all your efforts in doing what you're trying to do.
Thanks, Gary. We've got our parish councillors in the meeting, but at the moment they're not free to express opinions, but they will come in. I've got Linda Oliver, I said, who's our county councillor, has got her hand up, and I think I've got Radley and Sandy after that coming in. So Linda, over to you. Linda is our county councillor.
Thanks, Peter. This is for Paul, actually. Paul, who's had an independent consultant look at the transport assessment. I think it would be really wise to actually send that to Somerset County Council, to their generic Highways Development Control address, and I'll give you that. There's a guy called Ben Sunderland, who is the Somerset County Council Highways person, a senior officer who deals with applications in Mendip. What I do with any application that comes within my division, I always notify them of the planning application number when it comes through, any development, because I always worry that Mendip might not have notified them. So I wanted to give them pre-warning so they can start to look at it and take things into account. And I know Ben comes out on site. I know he does that. So it's Ben Sunderland who's the officer. And if you write to Highways Development Control at somerset.gov.uk, and I would strongly urge you share your independent consultant's comments, because then he could take them into account before he formulates an opinion, and obviously he'll be looking at their transport assessment. But I do share some concerns that you shared, because if you look at the Mead transport consultant comments, even that site that was very close to the A36 had a lot of traffic going in different directions. So it doesn't make sense that all the traffic would necessarily go out of Church Lane. Unless you go to Church Lane and turn left, you're going to have a real difficult job to turn right because of the volume of traffic. I also wanted to alert you to the fact that Simon Steele, I know he's got a double barrel name, but I'll call him Simon Steele, said that it's now the application's gone in that he will talk to development control. And I gave each developer across my division Ben's contact details. And what Somerset County Council do, they give pre-application advice. So it was wrong of him to say until the application went in, he couldn't speak to them beforehand. So the concerns about Clay Lane and the idea that could become a one-way system could have been voiced and shared with them. They will not design a scheme for the developer. That's for the developer to do. But they will give advice and talk about whether they thought the traffic would be significant, the concerns. They would say, well, we'd like to see this, we'd like to see that. And I don't know whether they did that. And I would question, have they had that pre-application advice? Because that would have been a wise thing to do. And I would also question, like I did the other day, is why it's an outline application. I know why it's an outline application, because they want to sell it. But they don't want developers to be tied down. But I do think the devil is in the detail, and there's a lack of detail here for 49 houses. It's pretty significant. So I know a lot of you are worried about the drainage. A lot of you are worried about the highways. And don't beat me up, but this is what happens. A lot of these things can be fixed by certain things. And there's other things that you might want to think about as raising an objection, things that might not be able to be fixed, or other concerns that you have. But certainly, I think if Paul sends his stuff to highways, it will help them consider it. There is data, Paul, which I've shared with the Parish Council. Ben Sunderland's got it, and all of the developers got it, because very recently, well, fairly recently, a couple of months ago, there was a speed, volume, and type survey done on the A361. So they know there is documentation that shows the volume, the speed, and the type of vehicles that use the A361, and obviously you'd expect there'd be a lot of HGVs. So if that information would help, Paul, just email me and I could forward that to you. Okay, thank you.
My pen, Linda, wasn't fast enough with your email address. Highways Development Control at...
It's Highways Development Control at somerset.gov.uk.
Perfect.
And then the officer, you could always, it's best to send it to a central address because he's got people who work for him. And the officer who deals with Mendip, who heads that up, is Ben Sunderland. And I have regular conversations with him, and he's an experienced officer, and he does come out. It's not desktop. So the more issues you raise, he's got more to look at.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Linda.
One problem I see with that, if you don't mind me coming in, is that because we've been under COVID restrictions for a year, any traffic assessment in the last 12 months is probably not realistic as to what the reality is.
Can I come back on that, Peter?
Please do, Linda.
Yes, we do have. Sorry, I don't know your name.
Andrew.
Andrew, you just say AJ Court on here. Yeah,
Okay.
Andrew, we do have data from a previous survey that was done post-COVID, and I've got that data somewhere in my system. So if Paul wants to email me, I'll find that and I'll send the other. The other one didn't do type, but we did it at the time of the application for the 5, well, it was 3, then 5 houses where they've knocked the bungalow down. So it's very relevant because it's in that area, that data. And I think Terry was online earlier, Terry Morrow. Both of us work with that data, so we could share that with Paul. He could share it with his independent guy. I think when we did the survey this time, we did it when the school was back, so that would help because lockdown wasn't on then. But there has been, I think it's about a 37% drop in traffic flows, yep. I was told the other day. So somehow that would have to be taken into account. But we have got that other data, which if Paul emails me, I'll send everything to him, and then you've got what you need.
Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Thank you very much. Sandy or Radley?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear, Sandy.
Jolly good. Well, I'm Sandy Wheeler, for anyone that doesn't know me, living in Road with my husband Radley for the last 42 years. And we're very concerned about the loss of privacy for the existing residential properties. The plans that were submitted have the boundaries of the new properties adjoining our existing boundaries. There's no buffer zone at all. So, I mean, our privacy to the gardens will be lost completely. The windows of the new properties will overlook our existing houses, and some of which in the Bradford Road are listed. So I feel that the proposal will create a total loss of privacy, and I sincerely hope that the Parish Council will take that into full consideration. Also, I'd like to point out that we've clearly heard the noise from the Church Farm development, and we dread to think what sort of noise we'll have to endure right on our doorstep for the rest of our lives to build 49 houses. So please, please stop it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't believe that Radley is going to stay silent, but at the moment it seems he is.
Yes, he is. He
okay.
left it to me.
Wise man. Go to John Lowe, please. John, if you could unmute yourself. And
yes, thank you very much. I'm John Lowe. I also live in the village and been here for about 37 years. Traffic has always been an issue, and I support everything that's been said about that. And I was a member of the Speedwatch team down Bradford Road for a number of years, and traffic was horrendous, to be fair. I know I might be repeating what others have said, but I think essentially the points are this. This is the tip of the iceberg. And if we're not careful, if we approve this proposal, then I see it as a sort of a domino effect, and the other fields opposite Brown's ground will start to go. And if you excuse the name, I think we'll end up with a fossil town. It's just going to domino effect all the way along. I also think that I don't believe that Andy Fussell, and he can tackle me on it if he wishes, is a farmer anymore. I think he's a developer. And as you said at the beginning, Peter, it affects people in many ways, and some closer than others. And to offer Brown's ground as an incentive, has been said, is not an incentive in my view. It's passing off a field which is unusable. And if you look at it after rain, it's just absolutely sodden. There's a complete mess, partly caused by him and the way he's ploughed it in the past number of years. And when we're talking about their proposal in terms of number of houses, they keep on talking about a local need. Well, the local need doesn't really exist for houses within the village. And I think that is a major point in my view. Finally, I'd just like to say that on a sad note, today we passed the funeral of John Wheeler, who lives at number 12 in Bradford Road. John was a strong objector to the proposal. He'd written to the Parish Council, and I hope you still take his comments into account. And it's just sad that his passing has occurred. And, you know, you can say, well, there's no proof, but in my mind, his mental health will have suffered through this proposal, and he was therefore not able to fight the problems he was fighting physically. Just one other point, Peter, you were talking about asking Andy Fussell to sit in the meeting next Tuesday. I was a bit surprised that, for the reason of clarification, but I was a bit surprised at the open meeting the other day, which he attended, that very few councillors actually asked any questions of clarification. So I just find you inviting him perhaps a bit strange. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thanks, John. One of the reasons why we're inviting him is that, as you'll remember, in that meeting, Barbie Lund raised a district councillor who has apologised. She's got a Mendip meeting this evening, so she couldn't be here, but I'm going to send her a copy of the recording. But Barbie Lund asked about the sustainability issues at the development, because she said that the current proposals were just complying with Mendip requirements, which are pretty minimum. And I have been told that as a result of that, they're going to come back and outline what their sustainability proposals are for those houses. So there is a reason to have Andy back just to explain that. That's yet to be confirmed.
Peter, I just wanted to, is it possible to come back on something Linda said?
Go on, yes.
And then I promise I will shut up, but not for tonight.
You never shut up, Gary, come on.
Well, to be honest, compared to years ago, I'm almost mute.
Thanks.
Linda very helpfully answered an email I sent her. Oh, and I'd just like to reiterate, by the way, what some of you said. I found Barbie's comments in the meeting, and also in response to something I sent her, very helpful, by the way. And Linda very kindly responded to something I said. But in that one of your messages, Linda, I thought you were suggesting that the issue of traffic, given the amount of extra cars, wouldn't necessarily merit a full traffic assessment, or am I wrong? And before you answer that, I just want to make the point about turning right. Because people won't turn right, lots of traffic will come down through the village. You cannot make Church Lane wider. Already, if you go up Church Lane or down Church Lane, as people will know, you quite often have to stop and back up.
Yeah.
Right? And never mind with more traffic coming through. In the high street, because of the parking, which is obviously has to be there, and that's fine, you cannot get two vehicles through. Never mind buses. The buses constantly have to back up on Church Lane. Okay, so extra traffic on there coming down Church Lane and onto High Street is going to cause a huge problem, frankly, because they won't turn right at the top. That's just, they won't. They'll come down Church Lane or they'll come up Church Lane to avoid it. And Church Lane isn't built for that, and neither is the High Street. And, you know, if we want to have any buses, then, you know, we need to think about that.
Thank you. Thanks. If Andrew and John and you, Gary, could take your waves down, it just makes it a little bit easier for me to spot the new people who put their hands up.
Peter, do you want me to respond to Gary?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, I keep unmuting myself. Yeah, Gary, no, a development of that size would automatically require a transport assessment. What I was saying is that before Ben Sunderland, there was a development control officer called Jackie Hobbs, who lives fairly locally, who knows the area well. When I alerted her originally to the applications in Road and in my division, we had a discussion about whether they did pre-application advice and should I be advising developers to talk to them. And she made it clear that they don't help them with their design, but they'll have a chat to them. But her initial comments, bearing in mind they don't see any detail, was that 49 houses generally would not generate significant traffic, particularly if you've got older people's accommodation. I just wanted to make sure you're all aware that older people's accommodation, age-restricted houses, tends to be 55s. Well, I'm 64, and I don't think I class myself as being old, but they are classed as older people, and it's determined that they don't have as many traffic movements. So it's trying to manage expectations, but there are other, you know, but that's without seeing the detailed plans, without knowing all the nuances of the village like you guys know. You might want to mention in any of your letters, particularly if Paul writes to through to Ben, is if he checks with traffic management team, they've had a number of complaints from Church Lane, the Church Farm development, of new residents who are complaining about they can't get out of Church Lane, Church Farm, which will be exactly the same as Church Lane.
Thanks, Linda. Can we go to Sally Pickett?
Thank you, Peter. Putting aside the emotional aspect, as Becky mentioned as well, about living on Bradford Road, there's quite a few points I just want to reiterate, some of which have already been mentioned, but I think it's important that they are such huge issues relating to this development that I really hope that the parish councillors, you know, take notice of the views that are being expressed tonight, because they are such important things. One of my main concerns is this idea of the outline planning permission that's already been mentioned, but as was already said, only 50% of planning permissions are proposed as outlying. And I really got the feeling last week from the meeting that Andy Fussell and Simon attended, it was so vague. Everything that was put to them, well, it was because it was outlying, so they couldn't say this or couldn't say that. Nothing could be guaranteed. The only thing that is guaranteed is that it will be concrete and there'll be 49 houses. And, you know, and then they're left to do whatever else they want with it. So if they get this passed, that's what it will become. And that was a real concern for me. And obviously the point of traffic just keeps coming up and up. But it's that important, and it should be really recognised that the traffic statement included in the proposal is flawed, as Paul has already demonstrated tonight, and the parish councils own independent expert have said their traffic proposal is flawed, and they need to, you can't amend these things once the houses are built. It's too late then, and we can't change the width of Church Lane. So that needs to be taken into consideration. And one of the things I mentioned in my letter to the parish council and Mendip was that very sadly in these COVID times, obviously a lot of businesses, particularly in town centres, may well fold, and inevitably, I think, in the next year or 2 years, there will be a lot of brownfield sites in our area that will be requiring development. And it seems crazy to me that a green space like that is being considered for development. And it's very short-term thinking, when very shortly, I'm sure there will be a lot of brownfield sites that can be used. And lastly, I just want to reiterate some of the environmental concerns that Barbie raised last week. And despite the fact that Andy Fussell might appear at the meeting on Tuesday to suggest some amendments, nothing that he can say will, his assurances means that any new environmental sustainability plans will necessarily happen, because, as we know, it's outlying planning permission. So we cannot take that as fact that they will actually be brought into the plans. And I think, again, very short-sighted that a developer in this day and age is not thinking about doing some putting in place environmental sustainability things into their plans. So it just, to me, really shows what kind of developers these are and what sort of plans these are, if that's how they go about it. Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Sally. I've got Pat's iPad with a hand up. I'm not sure which Pat that is. Could Pat's iPad unmute herself? Hello?
Sorry, Peter, it's Pat Banwell.
Ah, I did wonder. Hello, Pat.
Hi, it's Jeff who wants to speak.
Okay.
Actually, Peter, I just wanted to say that I made my own traffic assessment this afternoon. After the funeral, I went to drive up to the church just to check it over and make sure everything was okay. As I got up round towards the cheese house where the road narrows, I had to stop for 3 vehicles to come down. This was not in the rush hour, this was about 4 o'clock. 3 vehicles come down. I then went on a bit further, just past Gary Ball's. I had to pull in because Paul Smith was coming in his van. I stopped and he went on the pavement to get round me. On the way back from the church, I went to turn into Church Lane by the bell, and a bus was coming out, and I had to stop in the road while he came out. You know, do we need a traffic assessment? Our problem here is that the Somerset County Council Traffic Department is based in Taunton. It's an hour and 3/4 to drive from Taunton to here, and nobody ever comes up here to have a look. Sorry, Linda, you may say they do, but I don't believe it. The way they handled the traffic assessment on Church Farm, you just can't believe it. They look on a map and they say, oh, there's a road there, that's okay. You know, something's got to be done about this. You guys have just got to turn this down. We cannot go on. I moved from Church Lane. We lived in Church Lane in one of the bungalows up near the top of Church Lane. And I moved to the centre of the village 30 odd years ago because I was so concerned about the children coming down Church Lane, in the narrow bit especially, down by the cheese house, and having an accident. And nothing's changed, it's just got worse. There's twice the traffic now. You've just got to turn it down on those grounds, if nothing else. And as for people concerned about water, all I can say is they treat it with absolute contempt. When a question was asked about the water running down Brown's ground, we were told that they were going to plant apple trees and willow trees. If I'm not mistaken, apple trees and willow trees are both deciduous trees. What good are they going to be to sop up water in the winter? That's the sort of contempt that, I mean, we're just treated as if we're complete idiots. So that's all I've got to say, but it's probably more than enough. Does Pat want to say anything?
No, I think he's said enough.
Okay, thank you.
I've got my hand up, Peter, because Nicola.
Go ahead, Andrew.
Come in, thank you. Go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Nicolette, and I live with my husband Andrew, and I've been in the village with him for the last 17 years or so. So I just wanted to reiterate some of the things that have already been said because I think they're incredibly important. One being Greenfield site. I do not think we should build on any greenfield sites in the village, and in an open countryside as well also. It should not happen. We've chosen to live in a village. I think we're going to lose the character of our village if it expands, as the proposition is. I'm particularly worried about Clay Lane, as people have already said. That they're talking about straightening the dogleg at the beginning of Clay Lane, near the entrance to the estate, the new estate. By straightening this curve at the beginning of Clay Lane, which makes it a beautiful village lane, it's going to encourage people to go fast. It's going to encourage people to go along the lane, which is not suitable for cars at all. It is incredibly dangerous. I myself, as a regular walker along there, have met cars going too fast along there, and it really is dangerous. If if they're going too fast, you could easily get killed. It really is dangerous. Also, I'd like to draw attention to the fact that, which hasn't been mentioned, about there are some interesting historical remains on in the Barboursfield area. There's a history of a cottage industry of clay pipe making in the area, and we think that that's why Clay Lane got its name, from the pipe makers in people's gardens. And there were at least 26 master pipe makers in the area in Road between 1648 and 1796. And 2 kilns have been uncovered, one on the edge of Barboursfield. And hundreds of clay pipes have been found in the area, and some in Barboursfield. There's a Roman coin was found also in Barboursfield, dating from about 300, the year 300, so very, very old. The heritage statement that was submitted with the proposal of for this development states that a survey was carried out on the site in 2014 by Cotswold Archaeology. Well, in fact, they didn't survey Barboursfield itself. They did Brown's Ground. So Barboursfield has not been examined for archaeology or historical importance. And I really urge the Parish Council to ask for a survey to be done prior to making a decision on this, because there's some very interesting and important historical remains in the area. And there have been quite a number of Roman remains found in the Road area. So, and there are wells in the area which indicate that there may have been very early settlers, and there could be some very interesting things. So I don't think we should rush into making a decision. I think the decision should be deferred. We're in a pandemic. We all have a lot to deal with at the moment, and this is the last straw, having to deal with this on top of everything else. And I don't think it's the right time, and I think we should be given more time. And I think the Parish Council should listen to the village. I think the traffic issues are incredibly important, the routes that people take through the village. And I think that the village feel is going to be completely ruined by all these houses that are being proposed. And why is Road having to bear the burden of this on Greenfield sites? Why can brownfield sites not be chosen? Why not on the edge of Frome? Why is a village turning into a town? I think it's wrong, and we've chosen to live here as a attractive and small type village, and we don't want it to turn into a town. Okay, that's probably my lot.
Thank you,
Thank
Nicolette.
you,
And I've found your letter really interesting, particularly about the pottery industry. My wife has been studying the pottery industry in Wanstead for the last 5 years, and she was aware of it being here, but it was the points you raised were about that were of anecdotal interest, but really interesting. I'll come back to some of the other points later on which people have raised. Somebody's waving a hand at me. Alison, yes.
Can I just ask you, as a member of the council, do you feel that it is either or, and that's the issue, or as Nikki just said, there are 200 objections to the Mead development, and so far we've got 50, 60 objections to Barbara's Field. Does that mean, in your mind, that it's a toss-up, or are you thinking that you can object to both? And would it not be more sensible to say we object to both because we do not want any more building on green sites in the village, rather than saying, well, we are going to go for Barbara's Field because we feel it's less painful for the village than the Mead? That's something that really concerns me, that really I feel as someone who lives in a village, having lived in London for all my life and say had chosen to be here, that can you as a parish council say we do not want any more building here, and so consequently we will push both of them out?
Yeah, we answer to that specific question. The parish council can choose to say that it doesn't approve of either planning application, and it's not for me to prejudge, but I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't the view of the parish council. Where it becomes an issue, and it's an issue which has been raised in quite a number of the letters, is proportionality. As has been said in a number of the letters, road has already exceeded what people are calling its target. In fact, the 2029 figure isn't its target, it's its minimum amount that got changed in a revision of the Mendip local plan. But there is no question that the three villages of Norton, Beckington and Road have all exceeded their targets. Ours, but at the moment by 15%, Norton and Beckington by even higher percentages. And that's because these three villages were not answering a need for houses from Mendip. We're seeing people come from outside. I too came from London, but there is now a significant move from large cities into the southwest. The most dramatic changes in house searches are down here in the southwest, the increases in searches. So if you were a landowner, you would identify the opportunity and see that there is a very good opportunity to build houses, and given the location here in Somerset, that there'll be people moving down here. If they're coming from big cities, they'll be looking at much cheaper properties, much cheaper prices than, and that they will be able to buy very nice, probably better houses than they may well have in the big cities. So there are all those things going on, but in answer to your specific question, we can turn them both down.
Right.
Mendip could turn them both down. The worry is that Mendip will have to evaluate these two developments against the MPPF, and they have turned developments down, but they do need more houses, and so my greatest fear is that they will both get approved by Mendip. My lesser fear is that one of them would get approved, and it would be wondrous if both of them were turned down. There are strong arguments. We've heard about them today. There's obviously major transport infrastructure issues about this village, the huge number of parked cars, the extraordinarily large number of parked cars which clog up necessarily our high street, and any development, whether it's on Barbara's Field or the Mead, is just going to exacerbate that problem. There's the flooding issue, which the developers say can be ameliorated by actions that they take. And another issue which was brought up was the issue of this is the wrong time. Clearly this is the wrong time. Our society is going through the most huge changes because of COVID. COVID isn't going to go away in any short time, and to be taking all these development issues at a time when people can't have the proper opportunity to express themselves, it's clearly wrong. But the Prime Minister has said that one of the big drivers of the economy is going to be house building. And so on top of everything else, we actually have a recognition that our economy is going to be in a difficult situation, and house building is seen as a priority for getting it out of that situation. So there is enormous pressure to build more houses in our area, and it's going to be very difficult for us to successfully resist both.
But can I just ask, Peter, if you do resist both, once you've done that resistance, once you've said no, then it's for someone else to decide whether you do what happens, yes? Yep. So in fact, if you say no to both of them, then you are putting, whatever you can say, a mark in the sand, saying that this is not what we want for our village. Yeah. Where if you do approve one of them, which whether it be Barbara's Field or it be down at Muirfield, you are saying that this village is open for building. Because once you've approved one, there is the possibility that they will go for both of them. And that's really my point, is that you either say, right, this is not what we want, we get overruled by Mendip, or even if Mendip chuck them out, you're then overruled by central government. But at least at that point, you have put your mark on the line that this is not how we want things to continue in this village.
I understand that point, and I agree with it. And I'm sure that parish councillors have heard the comments today, and they've read the 50-odd letters objecting. Overwhelmingly, they're objecting. Sarah, I think you've been waving at me. Peter. Thanks, Alison. Sarah, are you going to unmute yourself? Sarah May, are you coming in? No, sorry. Julia, and I've spotted you, Dave. I'll come back to you after Julia.
Hi, Peter. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you for organising. And yeah, everyone that's spoken so far has made such good points. So I'm just so kind of pleased to hear it. I mean, we're on the high street, so we're not really directly affected by either the Muirfield or Barbara's Field developments. Obviously, traffic going through the village, yes, but kind of looking at them, not as much as people living nearby. But I feel so strongly against both of them. And for all of the reasons that have been said, traffic, it's open countryside, it's Greenfield site, it's agricultural land. We can't give this approval because, yeah, where does it stop? Also, yeah, terrible timing, the pandemic, and both of these big planning applications to be kind of put to Mendip at the same time, really. It's just crazy. And what I really kind of worry about is people's kind of energy to fight this. I mean, it's brilliant. We've had kind of, 39 or 50 comments on the portal kind of objecting to this. I just feel we're not going to get the same numbers that we had for the Mead and Muirfield, because I feel like people have just given their all already, like a few months ago. And I feel like people are just so tired of like trying to kind of fight. I want you to know that even if we don't get the same numbers of people formally objecting, that I think the feeling is as strong for this as Muirfield. So yeah, I just think, it's just such a difficult time for everyone. Everyone's really struggling. you know, with so many like emotions, things to, you know, financially, and like somebody said, this is like the icing on the cake. It's just another thing to kind of have to deal with, like people's mental health kind of over this. Yeah, people's worries about flooding, like on Clay Lane and Bradford Road from this. I mean, they can say, yes, all these kind of attenuation ponds to kind of alleviate the risk of flooding, but it's just like, will that actually be sufficient? I mean, I don't know, it's just such a terrible idea for so many reasons. I just think the benefits of new houses in the village does not outweigh all these like huge like negative impacts. So yeah, I'm strongly against it. And I really hope that as a parish council, you agree to object to this and other kind of large scale developments on Greenfield sites. So yeah, that's all I got to say. Very kind of emotional. I mean, that's it. It really does kind of get you. You just, I think so many of us, we love Road so much. We care so much about it. It's such a special place. We do not want, I mean, it's not NIMBYism. It's like, it's just preserving. And yes, things change, things develop. It's not like we're opposed to progress. It's just kind of in its place and the right way forward. So
thanks,
yeah,
Julie.
I think that's all I got to say.
Just on the issue of the number of letters, the planners at Mendip would tell you it's not the numbers, it's the arguments. They have to extract from however many letters they get what the key arguments are, and then they have to address those arguments. So yes, it's a number, but actually it doesn't have the validity, any great validity. The real validity is the strength of the argument, and that's what persuades the planners. It is not a democratic process. It's about a policies issue. So I'll come to Dave, and then I'll go to Robin. Dave Jupp.
Thank you.
Good evening again, everybody. For those that weren't there when I first came on, this is going to be all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order, like the other night. But we'll pass on that bit. As regards time in the village, me and Robin grew up here together, and there's one other lady that's a little bit older than us that also grew up here. So I'd like to thank you all for the fact how much you appreciate the village, and what we're all fighting for together here is the village. Otherwise it won't be one, will it? So as regards, we've heard a lot about MPPF rules and regs. So I suggest to those who don't support a neighbourhood plan, they type in MPPF and neighbourhood plan search, and you will find, I think it's under paragraph 9, several little bits and pieces that do support our neighbourhood plan. So therefore, I believe the parish council have to support what the village voted for, the neighbourhood plan, and use it as they should to support our case. Excuse me, Brownsground was not involved. Barbersfield or Brownsground was included in the vote, and we voted it out the same as we did this end. Doesn't matter about size of the majorities. The majority of the public said no. Within the neighbourhood plan, it states infill and brownfield sites. Infill sites like gardens where it might be safe to put a house. We've got a nice brownfield site. It's falling into dereliction at the moment. Admittedly, it's on a dangerous junction that we spoke about, but the Bell Inn. There's plenty of land in the car park in the field behind without having a big building site, just enough to have a few houses to keep us tied over. And that should come before any greenfield development, in my opinion. Again, we've spoken about the things. The traffic, I love that bit. That was great for somebody else to be involved in that sort of thing. The one thing that we didn't mention, just remember that Bath has now got a weight limit on the bridge at the fire station for trucks. So any of the trucks coming out of Froome area, even Shepton Mallet, to avoid Bristol, are using the 361 down to Yarnbrook to get to Chippenham, to get to the motorway. Obviously, there are more early mornings and late nights, perhaps, but the general thing is there's more trucks coming through there and vans and things like that. Excuse me, bear with me. Right, for Brown's Ground, I think under the MPPF, again, if you read it, greenfield spaces are protected, and so is the one here. And that was taken out when they so-called changed the inspector withdrew all the green spaces, but road neighbourhood plan and Froome neighbourhood plan, green spaces were reinstated. I think that's correct, Peter.
It is indeed, yep.
Yeah, right, fine. So Brown's Ground is a green space and is out of the question for, it's protected in the neighbourhood plan. To turn Brown's Ground into a park, the last time there was church farm development, land was given to the playing field. The playing field are struggling to manage that land as it is. The 106 agreement that was agreed on that has been nothing but arguments. And this last year, I've sat in nearly all your parish council meetings to keep on top of what's being said for planning angles. I've sat through 2 45-minute sessions just on road playing field 106 agreement. So just bear in mind that the cost, the poor road playing field, they're struggling to cover the costs on that anyway. We don't need any more overheads, such as what Brown's Ground would be in the long term. And if it is going to be, if it did go the wrong way for us, it needs to be done correctly through a landscape project with a landscape architect to make sure everything is correct. But hopefully we're not going down that road. Just a reminder as regards our walks in Parkland, we have a lovely riverside walk through Rockabella. We have the Beckington Loop if you want to go on the lanes to stay clean. And we've got the Telesford Walk as well. Why do we need Brown's Ground turned into a park? And if me and Robin can reflect on that, I think we probably played in Brown's Ground as young lads, Rob. How often did we use the wellies in the muddy cow hoof prints? You know, that's one for you. I know I haven't said how long I lived there, so I'm not telling you that bit. Obviously, I could go on, but I must say the support has been great. It would be interesting to know, I'm sure you're going to ask Peter, is there anyone who supports this tonight? Thank you.
Robin.
Yeah, Peter. Evening, I'm Robin. I'm a big friend of Dave, so he tells me. And I live in Clay Lane. I was going to disown you, Dave, at one stage. I live in Clay Lane House, which is a listed building. And most of my views are coming from that area of the heritage of this village. But I would like to kick off by saying that I understand this application was for Church Lane, as was submitted under the Church Lane heading, but it's so often referred to as a Barbers Field application. And I find that great a bit because, first of all, I can tell you, if you check the Mendip site and the report sent in by the developers, they haven't actually done a geophysical report on Barbers Field. They've done one on Brown's Ground, but they've missed Barbers Field, and they haven't walked the actual Cotswold archaeological study hasn't been done in Barbers Field since September 2014. So with those two things not on the actual application coming from the developers, how is it that they, I mean, that is very important things they've missed about Barbers Field. And coming on from that, there's the aspect of the community, which they've covered most of the community land at Brown's Ground. But there's the allotments, and apparently there's allocated for 11 allotments, and we've got 11 people waiting already. So if those allotments were to come to be, I imagine those 11 people were waiting would get them. But the 49 houses that just been built with probably very small gardens in, they're all put into Barbers Field, would be applying for an allotment. So where would they get the land for their allotments for the people that have just had moved into Barbers Field? So to me, it makes no sense that that list would be diminishing. It'd actually be growing for allotments. So that doesn't make sense to me. on that side of it. So moving on again is the accuracy of the plan application down at Mendip. If the developers put in, when they first put in the proposal for outline planning permission, which I must emphasize is outline, of the property, of the area, and it was inaccurate. They were using some sort of ordnance survey map, which went back to probably 1960, and the boundaries shown were not accurate, and they showed Alison's actual driveway in Clay Lane as being part of the development, which obviously it's not. It belongs to Alison. It was sold from Andy Fussell to Barbara back in the 80s. So, you know, that if it's that inaccurate, can we trust that everything else is actually accurate? How much land they've got to develop and all these other statistics? Who actually verifies that, Peter? Can you tell me if it's important to be an accurate plan at this level?
Is very important to be an accurate plan, and then, I mean, Simon Steele Perkins was very embarrassed with the fact that there were inaccuracies, but there have been 3 new plans uploaded onto the Mendip portal on January the 29th, which I understand are accurate now.
No, they're not.
No, they're not.
No, they're not.
Oh, they're not?
They still show Alison's driveway in the development, and we're expected.
Still completely wrong.
Pardon? And we're expected to actually put our own barrier up. I mean, Alison's expected, instead of the developer land being used for a barrier, her actual driveway is meant to be part of it. So, you know, if Alison decided to cut her trees down, which she's got every right to do, this would expose Clay Lane. We should have on the development land, we should have a barrier from seeing if it ever gets put through, which I hope it will not ever go through. So we'll be seeing the houses, because why should Alison keep those trees there?
Robin, could I just quickly pop in on that? We've had all sorts of conversations with Andy Fussell about where the boundary lies.
Yeah.
And he thinks it lies in a completely different place to where we think it lies. And but to the fact that actually he thinks we have a lot more of the field than we think we do. So whatever I haven't looked at the latest plans, but the very simple fact is that he wanted us to take ownage of the whole drainage situation because he didn't want to do it over our land. So we will have to very carefully go through that, because at the moment, when I looked at the plans last time, as you said, they're using our driveway actually as the boundary of the proposition. And actually we've got about 20 or 30 feet inwards, according to Andy Fussell, not according to us. According to Andy Fussell, when he came to speak to us about it, he said that, you know, it's in, so it is quite confusing.
Unfortunately, it was a verbal conversation you had, and you need to have things in writing. I've learned from experience that everything needs to be in writing, and this community area needs to be in writing before we actually give over the Browns ground and, you know, give into this application, because things have got to be in writing, got to be legal. You can't just say verbally, oh, you own that bit of land, because at the end of the day, you go off to Weymouth and look at the land registry, and that's where you'll find where you actually, what you do own. Is it land registry?
I'm going to do that.
Yeah, you should do that, because if it doesn't fit into their jigsaw, they won't allow you to register your land. And I've lived here before land registry was required, but I actually took it out when we agreed our boundary, and I had it land registered. And therefore, when you look at your land registry documents, it should show exactly where it is. And unfortunately, because it's agricultural land and not development land, it might not be quite so accurate, because you used to have a hedge ditch situation when it's agricultural land. And of course, nowadays, land registry, it's got a fence, wooden fence, shows exactly where the boundary is. And so the only aspect is, because where it's agricultural land, you're dealing with something that's never been quantified, really.
Okay. Just to say that it's 8:30, I'm quite happy to let this continue, but there may be some people who want to go and be amused by Jared Christmas, whose program starts now. I think that possibly we may have lost our parish clerk, but he's given valiant service for a very long while. And
still here at the moment.
Oh, he's still here with us. Okay.
Can I just quickly say, Peter?
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to make any comments should make them to Mendip. We've received lots, which is very helpful, and we'll be using those as the parish council to make a decision. But from now on in, it would be very much more helpful if any comments are directed to consultations at Mendip. I think we've got most of the parish's views, so to save me getting more and circulating more around all members of the parish council, really people now need to direct their fire to Mendip.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, that, and bearing in mind it is going to a planner in Mendip who will be looking for the argument. He won't be interested in the emotion, though that's obviously very important, but he'll be looking at the arguments and the case that we can put, the evidence that we can supply against those arguments. Mike, I see you just put your hand.
Yeah, literally just to reinforce what Hugh's jumped in and taken some of my fire there. Very interesting and very useful though it has been to receive the villagers' comments as a parish council. They count for nothing in terms of the final Mendip decision unless you direct them to Mendip. Sending them to the parish council does not mean that the parish council is going to send them on to Mendip or that Mendip will be aware of any of them. So if you want your views taken into account, then you need to send them to Mendip. Now, as a parish council, we've had a lot of letters, as Hugh said, some in favour, some against. But by sending them just to the parish council, they will not be taken into consideration in the final judgment that Mendip put in. They have to go to Mendip if you want them to be taken into account. The other thing, just very quickly to say, is this has been really interesting, really useful this evening as a parish councillor in terms of judging the mood of the village, in terms of how as a parish council we will vote next week and make our decision. But whatever decision we as a parish council make, that's not the final decision. We will be one of many voices that feed into this decision at Mendip. So whilst hopefully we will do what we believe, obviously what we believe is the right thing for the village in terms of the situation we find ourselves in, we are but one of many points of consideration that Mendip will take into account when they're making their final decisions. So really that's just to moderate the expectations of villagers. So whether we say yes or whether we say no, we approve or we disapprove of this, that's not going to be the final decision. That's down to Mendip, and it'll be a lot more than just the parish council. Our view will be taken into consideration, but it is by no means the only view and the only points that will be decided upon by Mendip when they come to their final decision.
Thank you very much, Mike. I totally agree with all of that. Paul, were you wanting to come back?
It was just a very quick 30 seconds about the developer's perspective on consistency or otherwise on similar planning applications. And from a developer's perspective, there's nothing better than a lack of consistency, because it gives one the immediate grounds for appeal against the other, because you automatically undermine your position. So it was a plea for consistency, because it's a tool that we use in order to get what we want in what might appear initially to be a tricky situation. The second developer's perspective that I will just quickly offer up, I'm giving away all the secrets, but Greenfield sites are difficult because there is almost always no utility provision to that site. There would never really be a need for it. We've talked about drainage, but one of the reasons why you don't like pushing sustainable solutions is because it increases significantly the electrical demand for a development. Because electric vehicles and electric heat pumps, which will soon become legislated normals, push the electrical demand up to astronomical highs. Now, we already have a few power cuts around the place. It's part of living in the village. But I have no idea where the electrical infrastructure will have to go back to provide a sustainable development for 49 dwellings. And that will have to be trenched all the way to that position. Now, the only route out is through Church Lane. And the disruption for traffic and the disruption for residents for that should not be taken lightly. That's just the electrical infrastructure. There are parts of the village where the water pressure is already at the statutory minimum. Any additional water demand will require water reinforcement, and I have no idea where that will come from. Broadband, as we've already heard from some of our village friends this evening, is a bit patchy in places. And my wife and I struggle to get a decent connection with the school to hear about how our daughter's homeschooling is going. Broadband needs to be reinforced. And Peter, you've been in the middle of some excellent initiatives to get us broadband, so you're more than aware of these problems. This is where, as Dave says, Section 106 issues come to the fore. The cost of developing greenfield sites in a proper way is huge, but the disruption is also huge. So 2 quick developers' perspectives about the additional considerations that don't often get surfaced and are not mentioned anywhere in this document that we've been reviewing. But I completely agree with everything that all of my fellow villagers have been saying. And thank you, Peter, for organising it, and thank you, everybody, for attending.
Well, and thank you for making those final points, which I think I hadn't been so aware of in terms of power and water in particular. But we are all aware of the disruption that any roadworks on Church Lane can cause, because we've been through that last year. I've got one last hand up, and then I'm going to suggest we draw it to a close unless anybody really wants to speak. So Julia, back to you.
Just a really quick one. Just thanks Hugh and Mike about kind of saying about people responding directly to you with their objections or their concerns. Just wanted to check, are you able to kind of reply to everyone to let them know, like to direct their concerns straight to Mendip? Obviously great to say it in this forum, but is Hugh able to kind of respond to everyone to let them know to redirect, just to capture all of that?
That's an entirely legitimate point to make. I will talk to Hugh, and between us we will try and ensure that an email goes back to those people who have sent us messages objecting or supporting, that actually they would be best advised now to pass their thoughts on directly to Mendip. I say this tentatively because actually the workload on our parish clerk compared with what it's been over the past 10 years I've been on the parish council has been quite extraordinary this year. But he and I will talk about that and try and find a way of doing it, but it's a legitimate point. We'll pick up on it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Andrew, are you still wanting to say something? Not still. Are you wanting to say something further?
Yes, please. Just
please.
A very, very quick point. I was a bit unnerved, shall we say, by the thought that Andy Fussell might be present at your Tuesday meeting where this is going to be decided. I feel very uncomfortable about that. I don't know how everyone else feels about
it. When we were talking to Murfield, we did have 2-3 sessions with, I think 2 sessions for sure, with David James. Andy Fussell wouldn't be there during the discussion. He would be there at the beginning of the meeting, to address some outstanding issues. It's not yet confirmed if that will be the case, but I note your comments, and if he does join the meeting, we would ensure that he was only there at the beginning of the meeting,
okay,
and not during the discussion. Yeah.
Thank you.
Just, Peter, could I just say one?
Yeah, Dave.
The query about sending them to the parish council as well as Mendip. The reason we done that with the Murfield meet is to make sure the parish council were aware of the amount of letters that were going into Mendip, even though you see it down there, that we had some proof both ways. That was the reason it was done.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean to say it's got to go to all the councillors, but as long as Hugh's got a copy. That's my feeling.
Hugh is obligated that if he gets something sent to the council, then he has to send it to all the parish councillors, and that's entirely right and proper in the case of planning applications. It's right and proper in the case of anything, but particularly the planning applications. And I think I speak on behalf, I'm sure, of all the other councillors and our district councillor and our county councillor, all of whom have been copied as well. It's been really useful in both the Mead and the Barboursfield applications to see those letters.
Yeah, so, sorry, Dave, I hope it wasn't, you took offence at something I said. My point was not don't copy in the parish council. It was more, don't assume that by copying the parish council that Mendip are going to know your views. By all means, copy the parish council as well as Mendip, but don't just send it to the parish council and assume Mendip are going to get it, because they're not.
That's fine. That's what we want, though. Both places. Both places.
Yeah. Okay. So
I just say I don't forward them to the Mendip, but anyone who does comment to Mendip must include the reference number to this planning application. Otherwise, it will just get forgotten, ignored, not registered by them. So do remember, put the number on. Thank you.
Thanks. Words of wisdom again. Well, thank you. I think we got as many as 38 people on this call at the high point. We still got 36, which I think again shows the interest in this matter, which will, I'm sure, have registered with both me and all the other parish councillors. I mean, there are a host of arguments. I think probably the one which has been emphasised most powerfully is the transport situation in its broadest sense, everything from the accidents, the problems on Church Lane, and the consequences for traffic elsewhere in the village. The concern about building on a Greenfield site, concerns about flooding, concerns about its outline application rather than a full application, infrastructure pressures, power and water have been raised by Paul, which were interesting points. Medical infrastructure is not a district planning issue, but we know that another 49 houses put yet further pressure on Beckington. The school, many people, not least myself, thought the school was at full capacity. We've been corrected on that point very forcibly by parish resident. The school is under capacity, so they would welcome extra people at the school. I might just mute people. No, I won't have to mute, but yes, I will. So all of those points, I think I mentioned flooding and runoff water. All of those points will need to be made and should be made with as much evidence, as much argument and support for those cases as is possible, because it will be the quality, not the quantity of argument, which will carry weight with Mendip. So thank you very much. I hope you found it useful. I hope it hasn't been too stressful going over these issues. Planning is deeply stressful, particularly, but not only, if it's happening in close proximity to your homes, as this application would clearly be the case. So thank you very much. I hope you can now enjoy what's left of a Thursday evening. I hope lots of people are supporting Jared Christmas, who's got his own challenges in lockdown, but is quite a character in the village. And I hope we'll see Ben Voles out there again tomorrow morning doing his cleanup, which has made such an impact on Church Lane over the last couple of days as it made on Lower Street last week. So thank you very much, everybody, and wave you all good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye all.
Bye, Dave.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh dear, oh dear.
Look at Bradley.